CEO and founder, Deborah Weinswig. I want to encourage everyone to use the chat Q&A function if they want to submit any questions during the event, and we'll get to as many as we can throughout the day. So thank you all for joining, and with that, I'll pass it to RJ for a quick introduction of Placer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is one of my highlights. The few times a year we do these webinars. Always amazing to chat with Deborah and you, Stephen, just topics that are out there, and it's always great to trade notes on what we're seeing, and you usually come out of these things with some new insights. So hopefully everybody does the same here. Just a quick intro on Placer.ai, what it is we do and how we get our data. If you're not familiar with us, we are a location-based analytics company powered by mobile data. In simpler, plain English terms, that means we are a data firm that can get foot traffic estimates for any physical place in the United States, whether that's an individual retail store, shopping mall, grocery store, airport, downtown area. Pretty much anything you can draw a shape around on a map, we can get foot traffic data for. The way it works is we partner with several dozen mobile app companies, and through those app partnerships, we get location data on a panel of about 30 million devices. Importantly, all personal information is stripped away. We don't know that it's RJ's phone that went into a store. We just know that a phone went into that shape that we drew around on a map. From that sample, we take the latest in AI and machine learning. That's where AI and Placer.ai comes in, and use that to extrapolate and come up with the full estimates of that particular location. At this point, as Stephen mentioned, we work with about 5,000 different customers. They've all gone through a data validation and process, and feel pretty good about the consistency and accuracy of our data. But at this point, we're much more than just a foot traffic company. I like to think of our data as the what, how many people go into a store, how long they stay there, where else they shop. But really where the power of our data is unlocked is with some of the other third-party data providers that we layer on top of ours. Think about it this way: if a device goes back to a certain zip code block every night, and that's about as granular as we're going to get, we have third-party data providers who can give us psychographic and customer segmentation and demographic data about those zip codes. And so you can start to answer the why and the how about what's going on, and do it in real time. Our data is provided on a 3-day lag, so we can see things as of this past weekend already. We're seeing impact from weather, we're seeing impact from other current news. So a lot of the great things you can do with our data. If you haven't seen us, please check us out. Placer.ai got a lot of free good content, free data. We'd be happy to speak more if there's a bigger picture topic that you want to dive into. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah just to set the stage here about first half of 26, because it really has been yet another eventful 6 months that we've gone through, and I think they're probably going to be consistently changing here, but it has been a very eventful start to 2026.
I mean, first of all, I think we started working together. I never thought placer would become a verb, but right, for those of you in the industry, right, I remember hearing it, I'm going to placer it, and I'm like, what is that? That's so cool, right? So that's kind of, I think, RJ, when you've made it. But looking kind of back to look forward, I think that for retailers, what they've been the most surprised at is how strong foot traffic has been. And right, especially if you look quite broadly, obviously some of the things we're going to talk about today, such as the World Cup, I think they've also been surprised at how impactful, right, during a game, the impact that has on traffic. And that's actually been a global kind of phenomenon. And once again, I think it surprised a lot of the retailers who are more US centric. Secondly, the way that people are shopping, how much they're kind of purchasing per trip, increases in frequency in certain types of retail. And then this kind of, I feel like the food at home versus food away from home. Right, on our last call, we started to kind of see some, I would say, tension there. And I think that's continued to grow. And so we're going to dive into some of the details, but we're also going to talk about what's on the mind of a lot of retailers, and of course, how technology is impacting the in-store experience, and what we can all learn from that will be part of this conversation as well. So with that, RJ, I'll turn it over to you, because we have definitely had, I would say, volatile, dynamic first half of the year.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to even further than that, obviously. And so what I'm showing on this chart is the year-over-year change in weekly visits to the top 100 retailers ranked by visitation. And obviously see a lot of ups and downs, a lot of noise, a lot of things going on here. I think that just underscores how much is really going on. But just a couple things to call out on this slide. I think if we go back to last February, which if you recall, that was the month that we started to hear about tariffs, we started to hear about government restructuring, we started to hear about immigration reform, egg price surcharges, and a healthy dose of inclement weather. So it was kind of the month that, looking back on things, was kind of an inflection point for consumer behavior. I think what we started to observe at that point was a consumer that was already kind of feeling the pinch of inflation, not just in food but other categories, went from an inflation-sensitive consumer to a hypersensitive consumer. And by that I mean, instead of just reacting at the store when they see higher prices, we're getting ahead of it, or we're trying to actively get ahead of it. They were watching for news about tariffs. They were watching for things, particular categories that may be impacted. And we usually see, 10 days before a tariff was supposed to go into place, we'd see warehouse club visits spike. We'd see big box, depending on the category, visits spike. So it really became apparent that consumers were more aware of prices, more aware of potential price hikes than they ever had been before. And what that manifests itself as we go through 2025 was, we hit the midpoint of the year, and I think that's where we started to hear about bifurcation, K-shaped economy, things like that. And you may ask, well, we saw this big step up in visits, to your point, Deborah. People started to visit stores more. And I think what we started to see was people were spreading around those visits to really maximize their household budget, to look for the best deals. And really, that's the mindset that continued really through about, I would say, really about April this year. We get to April, well, first off, we get to February, and we started to see the increase in retail gas prices. We got above $4 and we got above $4.50. Obviously, parts on the coast, we saw even higher spikes in that too. We did see people start to shop around, but once we got to kind of the April timeframe, we did start to see kind of that trade out. People, were really feeling the pinch of gas, and then started to maybe pull back on the number of visits. So that's what we continued to see, at least in April, May. We get to June, we saw a little bit of a bounce back. Some of that was lapping easy comparison a year ago, but as gas prices did start to come back, people did start to see a little bit of relief. And so now the question becomes, what do we see in the back half of the year with gas prices? Because it is having an impact on consumer spend and mindset. So I think that'll be one of the variables. The big thing here, though, too, is that we painted a picture of a sensitive consumer, but it is still a resilient consumer. One of the things we do see is obviously visits up. We do see, even in the discretionary categories, people are spending. I think we've got a consumer that doesn't want to feel like they're pressured by macro trends and is willing to make a discretionary purchase here. Maybe it's not a big ticket purchase, but maybe small indulgences, smaller ticket, discretionary buys. So that's kind of the mindset that we have, as a deal-driven, value-focused consumer, but one that is still somewhat resilient and willing to spend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been surprising almost the level of discretionary sales that we've seen. And when we do this weekly survey of consumers, a lot of it ends up being almost kind of like need-based with GLP-1, right? Because the consumer's changing sizes, and it's not just apparel, right? It's footwear and accessories as well.
Yeah,
I think the jewelry impact has exceeded, what jewelry companies had thought they would see, but right, wrist, ring, etc. And so you have had this whole kind of cycle that, right, with some of the changes we've just seen with Medicare and Medicaid, right, you're going to continue to see this population grow. And I think what's also been interesting, going back to some of this kind of food at home versus food away from home, and you start to look at like food volumes, and then even, and RJ, I know you spent a lot of time in the restaurant space, how the consumer is even thinking about, right, going to restaurants, right? It's your whole evening now, right? I mean, these changes, and they've happened really, once again, year over year, but even sequentially. I mean, it's been a lot, and it's a lot to analyze. So I think this will be really interesting to kind of see, as we talk today, and unpack this for our listeners and for ourselves as well, what we think the first half tells us about the back half of the year.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting too. I mean, you bring up GLP-1 and, I think certainly macro and gas prices have been the number one thing that we've gotten questioned from our retail and restaurant and CPG customers, and rightfully so, because I think that impacts a wider swath of consumers. But now that we're approaching, what is it, mid-teen adoption or, usage on GLP-1s either have or are concurrently using, it's going to start to be a bigger factor. And I mean, we're already seeing it in the categories that you'd expect to see it. As you mentioned, restaurant and dining is the key, or one of the key ones. We see it with food away from home, so food retail in general. Fitness, not a surprise. That actually is a category that continues to do very well. Seen some major structural changes in that. Apparel is a category that we generally have seen outperform other discretionary categories. Jewelry, same thing. Beauty and wellness would be in that categories. But even the second derivative of these things, and I think we've talked about this in the past, things like housewares. Like, if you're going to show off new wardrobe, new body, well, you're also probably going to upgrade the house. And so we've seen small ticket things, small ticket home furnishing purchases, continue to do well. And so it's interesting kind of looking at the ripple effect, and I think that's going to continue to play out.
I think that you bring up the home category, I find is the one that has been the most elusive to people in terms of what's happening. I think it goes back to soft home, hard home, and then thinking about bigger ticket purchases. And right, what we have seen is kind of, I think people too, going back to food at home versus food away from home and entertaining, and just where you're spending your time, how you're spending your time, how you are taking care of yourself because you feel like you are more in control. And I think these are long, right? These I think have a very long tail.
Yeah.
And so I think home, which has been, let's say, with interest rates and we just haven't seen kind of the housing cycle. I think that everybody keeps predicting, but it just seems like a little bit out of our reach. Every time you think you're going to see it, you don't. So
I would agree. I mean, if you look at home furnishing as a whole, as a category, it is one of the weaker performings, and we'll show a little bit of that later. But there are pockets within that. At least people, I think, want to maintain and do things for their home, but it's also, you're right, interest rates have been a barrier on that one up to this point. On the next slide, we actually start to see some of this impact, and like we talked about. So what we're showing here is year-over-year change in discretionary change, year-over-year change in non-discretionary, and then full site gas stations, and then overlaid with the national price per gallon. The takeaway on this one is that we have seen non-discretionary generally outperform discretionary, but again, discretionary is not dead. I mean, there's still growth, there's still year-over-year increases, and I think a lot of that is, you're right, there's some need-based stuff, but even the small indulgences and things like that, I do think we have a consumer, particularly middle-income consumer, where I think a lot of the changes have happened over the last 12 months that almost kind of the fear of missing out. Like, I'm used to a certain lifestyle, I don't want to get left behind, so maybe I'm going to make a less conspicuous visit to an Aldi or Trader Joe's, substitute a traditional grocery store visit for something value price, but still maintain that the small luxury, those other purchases. Gas station visits, not a surprise given where we were. This lines up nicely with the retail sales numbers that came out today from the Census Bureau, and I do think that has put downward pressure on kind of travel this summer. But it is a consumer that is still maintaining some resiliency here.
Yeah, I think that what you mentioned about it was interesting. I did an interview yesterday with a German outlet on Aldi and Trader Joe's, and do Americans know who owns them, and the history of the history. And I think that, right, and we just talked about, I mean, right, they used to be called Aldi and Lidl used to be called like hard discounters, and and what we've seen over time, right, not only have they gone into more affluent neighborhoods, but I think that private label right now, almost that's exclusive, right? Because you can only get it in certain places. And I think that the American psyche has really changed. And a lot of it goes back to the pandemic, when in some stores, because of challenges with national brand distribution, right, you'd go in and 2/3, 3/4 of the shelves might be only private label. And I think that in your opening remarks around this kind of value orientation, it's, we used to say it's cool to be frugal, but I think that not only do consumers feel smarter in terms of how they're budgeting, but I think they feel smarter in terms of, right, I mean, I was very open with this outlet. I'm like, I started to shop at Aldi. I was, I grew up as an athlete. when I was in my mid-20s, because I was starting to look at, sodium and sugar on the back of packaged goods. Right. And Aldi, it's some of the lowest out there. And so, right, if you're getting a phenomenal price and great quality, that I think when we look at that category, and then on the apparel, footwear, accessories side, right, we continue to see this outperformance of, TJ Ross, Burlington, et cetera. And I think they're going back to feeling smart, right? As long as you're a bit brand agnostic, they are always going to have a pair of jeans, a pair of, let's say, black shorts, a pair of, running shoes in your size. And so if you start to think about it from a time perspective, right, that time value relationship, you can have a much more efficient trip. And I think from our research as well, we're hearing that about, right, the Aldis and Lidls of the world, as well as Trader Joe's, because you have a smaller box, you have a few SKUs in each category. But I think RJ, I think there's almost something more in terms of, and the consumer is probably unaware of it, but they are thinking differently about their time as well.
I think you're 100% right, and I think your point about shopping smarter, I feel like I'm getting a good deal, and that goes back to that hyper price sensitivity that we talked about. Hey, I'm beating the price increases that are out there. I'm being smarter about it, and I think that's 100% right too. I'd also throw in the argument that they've really been the innovators within the retail category. I mean, there's whole cottage industries devoted to Trader Joe's new flavor updates, new product launches at this point, and Aldi's starting to have a similar feel to it as well. So I think they create a lot of excitement that, honestly had probably been missing from some of the larger CPG brands. Although I admit this summer we're starting to see some new flavor profiles and things at CPG that's really driving that, and I think they're getting smarter about who the customers at even a store level basis are. But I think the innovation, don't overlook that too. I think just creating excitement. Hey, this is a new product that people can talk about or go viral. I mean, and there's obviously things that the totes that have gone viral for things like Trader Joe's, but I think it's more than that too. I think it's smarter, but also excitement.
Yep. We have a few questions. I just want to make sure, because some of them address this slide specifically. And thank you, everyone. Please drop your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. With gas prices going higher, has there been any meaningful uptick in traffic in centers served by public transportation? Good question.
It's a good question. I don't know if I've actually looked at that, so that's something I'll get back to you if you want to ping me offline. That would be something too. We have looked a little bit at public transportation and others, but I think it's hard with a little bit on the noise too, especially World Cup. Some of that is getting distorted as well, but that's worth looking at. That's actually a really good question. I'll have to do a follow-up on the next one and talk about that one.
This is a broad one, but how is AI driving new insight and value for retail operations? I mean, maybe RJ, you can also lean into what that's doing for Placer, but then we've had, I will just take part of this. What I think has been interesting is how retailers I feel like it's really the first time, they feel like they have the power of intelligence to make decisions that cut across, right, the organization and take down the silos. And so I feel like they're getting decisions made with more kind of a more cohesive approach, and it's more successful as a result. And I don't know if I've really thought about it that way, but it's been fascinating sitting in different boardrooms on how the conversation is just dramatically different. I don't know, what are you seeing from the kind of retail side, and then what about at Placer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, I think this year in particular, I think we did move past kind of the experimentation, generative AI type things where you could do some stuff with it, but you really weren't making many meaningful decisions based on AI. I think this year has been the inflection point, and some of the advancements and some of the LLMs that are out there, but basically democratizing our data. Basically, instead of, and we've always wanted to make our data as accessible as possible, but we throw a lot of data at consumers. Well, honestly, we know that, and sometimes it's hard to kind of parse out exactly what you need to make that decision. With some of the new tools that are out there, it's basically having a conversation with our platform, and you can get that answer a lot quicker than you had in the past. And to your point, I think getting to the data that you want and actually feeling confident to make the decision, I think that's kind of where we're at right now in the kind of adoption model. I mean, it's amazing internally the groups that we're working with. I mean, we've always worked with real estate. We've always worked with marketing. Now we are starting to deal with strategy and insights. That is kind of where we're seeing a lot more adoption in Placer these days. So I think to exactly that point, Deborah, I think you're spot on in terms of what people are using it for and starting to make a lot more decisions on it.
It's interesting. That's why I love these conversations. Is we're starting to see a whole new, call it, class of startups as well that are really focusing on kind of in-store experience.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. It's also, what can the store manager do? How can we empower them? And right, because we've had this, kind of long diatribe of, right, like everything's moving, kind of online and, less of a focus. Yes, you've had in-store tech, but I feel now it's about the people in the store, not about the kind of, bright shiny objects we can throw at them.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is, and what are you seeing around like dwell time and how many doors people are visiting per visit? Like, are they starting to, right, with higher gas prices, right, the age-old wisdom is that, right, they, spend more time in, let's call it power strip, et cetera, and they, kind of make more stops per visit. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can tell that over the next couple slides here as well, because I think on the next one, this will help to kind of trace this whole story. Because what we did see, so by the way, so what we're showing on this, most people think Placer as the company that does, retail and restaurant foot traffic. Obviously, we do that as well. But anything that has physical assets, we can also look at data. And so I thought it was super interesting looking at visits to fulfillment centers. This is a basket of fulfillment centers across a number of brands. So we've got Amazon, we've got some of the major retailers, we've got FedEx, UPS, we've got a good collection of them. And you see the big jump up last year, mid-July. Obviously, that was Prime Day 2025. But what we're showing on this is that when we got the higher gas prices, all of a sudden people started to shift a lot more activity towards online. We saw a lot of activity at fulfillment centers. So gas prices were part of it too. Admittedly, Amazon and same-day delivery for grocery was another part of it too. So I don't want to say it's all gas prices on here, but we've seen a pretty big uptick in visits to fulfillment centers over the last, call it 3-4 months. And so I think, and to answer your question directly about gas prices and what we saw with consumer activity, what we did see, at least from February to March and early April, was people actually were still in this behavior, shopping a wider number of locations, looking to seek out deals, looking to find value. But if you go back to that original chart that we had on the first slide, we hit April and May, we did see that step down in terms of year-over-year visit. That was people pulling back on visits. And so that's kind of where we've at now. As we kind of saw gas prices come back and now start to go back up again, we've kind of started to see people continue to shop around. To your point, I mean, consumers want to feel like they're smart. They want to feel like they're getting deals right now. So I think that's kind of the first part of the question. Now on the next slide, I think we've got on the next slide.
Can we wait 1 second?
Yeah.
Do you think there was, because, of course we always, while we're an N of 1, I will say that in my own personal, because I've always been, right, stores first, and starting at about the same, right, I don't drive, I don't drive and I don't really need a car since I live in New York. And so this is why, right, you think about Wall Street, that's the majority of it. So we may be late sometimes to the whole gas price party, one way or another. But I will say in my own personal life, I started to see a significant change in how I was shopping at about that same time. Is there kind of like a second derivative or anything else that you guys are seeing besides just gas prices?
I mean, I think you mean just what people are focusing on. I think it's not just gas prices, but it's the idea that, again, shopping smarter. I mean, I think that's a big part of it too. If I feel like I'm getting quality out of this product, I'm okay paying a premium for it. It is interesting with gas prices, derivative of that. We've talked to some groups too about delivery, food delivery. I mean, I don't know if you're actually saving money with it, but there's been a pretty big uptick. Looking at other data partners that we work with in food delivery over the last couple of months as well. So it's interesting, kind of looking at behavioral shifts on that too. So I think to your your point, there's a lot of cross currents going on right now in terms of behavior. Again, I don't think it's necessarily only gas prices, and I do think that some of the changes in Amazon and others have made here has helped to drive some of the increased visitation to these centers. I mean, and other factors involved as well. But it's not just gas prices. I mean, it's certainly, we've talked about a number of the things. GLP-1 is obviously a big factor. Even something as much as weather, which obviously has been crazy at the beginning part of the year with all the snowstorms and then hitting the heat waves that we've had the last couple of weeks. Those are certainly factors as well.
I thought this was a good question, which is, what's one data point or trend that most executives are underestimating right now? Please don't say AI.
No, that one I think is fine. I mean, I think GLP-1 is probably the one. I think that's still, when I talk to a lot of executives, it's kind of like they know it's there, but they're not really putting a lot of focus. And I think that's going to shift. Maybe not GLP-1, but I think broadly speaking, consumers' adoption towards health and wellness. And anybody, Deborah, you and I have been in this space for many decades now, and every couple of years there's a cycle. Health and wellness is a trend, and rarely do consumers really stick with whatever behavioral changes. But it is happening this time, and that's the thing that's really interesting to me. And GLP-1 is part of it, but I think just better education about the benefits of health and wellness and other technologies that are out there, and it is driving structural changes across a lot of categories. And so I think that is one that you can't overlook and just say, oh, it's a fad. GLP-1s, they'll have their moment, but they'll go away at some point. I do think there is a broader movement, especially kind of looking even at the younger end of the spectrum, kind of younger demographics. There's a lot of changes and more focus on that than probably previous generations. So I think that's when we look back at kind of this time period, I mean, a lot of people think we'll talk about macro uncertainty and volatility, but I think this will be kind of the point that we really saw a mind shift in consumer behavior towards health and wellness.
Well, it's truly different this time, right? Because, and I think that what you bring up about generations, right? It's across, and we've had some of our clients are setting up like Gen Z councils, because I think we're starting right with the greatest wealth transfer that's ever happened, and so they're affluent, right? Single households, they are right and they feel that it's in their power with health and wellness. I mean, like, to me, right, I remember being at FMI a few years ago, right? And so all of these CPGs were talking about the real changes in trend in terms of taste, right? Kind of like spicier, hotter foods. And then secondly, protein. And so I knew that something was different when I saw protein infused water. And I was like, we all have had our moment. And then that's also impacted, right, kind of bars and restaurants, and right, like mocktails are now being sold at the same price as cocktails, and right, it goes back to, we could do a whole like word salad, but it is different this time. I mean, I don't know if we end up having reversion to the mean, even though as a former strategist you always did. I just think it's right, we're empowering people in a way that we haven't before, and I think that's kind of like really changing things.
I think empowerment's very much part of it. I think, I mean, we've seen some of these shifts. And Stephen, let's go one more forward here, because I want to get to the dwell time here as well. But I do think this idea that we're empowering consumers, we have more access to different technologies. The companies themselves, in terms of CPG companies, have better technology to produce these things and faster things. And honestly, I mean, just reflects the makeup of the country too. I mean, a shift toward, well, and partially the pandemic with people being inside, exposed to new ways of cooking, exposed to new ingredients. I think that helps accelerate some trends that are already taking place. So I think it's a broader, and we could certainly spend another hour, multiple hours covering the topic there. But anyways, to get to your question, we talked about kind of the idea that people are shopping around more, or at least had been, until we started to see gas above $4.50. We saw the rise up in online retail, but this is what we're showing for dwell time. So what we're showing here is the percentage of visits that were under 15 to 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes. We're kind of seeing this, the long visit go down. And generally speaking, if we go from pre-pandemic to today, dwell time is down for most retailers in a either mid to high single digit fashion. consumption. Some of that is buy online, pick up in store. Some of that is consumers doing more research. Some of that is people just, again, they're shopping a wider number of locations and filling out that basket differently, increase in smaller fill-in trips. And so we have seen dwell time go down. It's a number of factors that are driving it, but did want to make sure, I know we asked that question a few minutes ago, but want to make sure we at least get a definitive answer to it.
I think that I think going back to how brands and retailers are reaching consumers as well through social media, we are hearing, and I think this is really kind of a third quarter going into fourth phenomenon, is that there's a lot more experimentation right now, right? Trying to kind of like outsmart the algos. And that, like from what we hear, right, more anecdotally, as we're doing consumer surveys, is interesting. This is a great question from Richard. I want to thank you because I don't think we've done enough research on this. So I'm hoping, RJ, you have, and if not, we should put our heads together after this and get back to Richard. But
Sure.
What is the impact of nearly 40% of children still living at home with their parents? That's children under 40.
Yeah, that is a great question, but we have started to see, at least we've seen a shift towards that younger, that Gen Z family formation, and your point, single family home. I mean, at least we started to see them move out of the homes a bit more, maybe taking over the family home, and the parents go to, move to the southeast, something like that. And as they've done that, that's where we've seen adoption, like a lot of the driving warehouse club visits right now. We look at the younger consumer. It's one that's at an earlier point in their career, so it's actually brought household income down. I think that ultimately has freed up a lot of discretionary income, though, too, for that group that is still living there. I think this is one we probably do want to put our heads together and still come up with some research. But I do think we look at kind of that resiliency in consumer and that discretionary category, while mixed results, but still generally positive on a year-over-year basis. I do think that's had a benefit some of those consumers living at home, and freeing up some expenses, some costs that way. Certainly helped to keep some of the discretionary retailers, continue to see visitation trends positive there.
I was at this great conference in February called CMA, Category Management Association, and
Yep.
so you're with all these category managers, and right, you and I ask questions for a living, and there were several, pet retailers there and pet brands, and they said that in like year on year, they had seen a 24% increase in cat ownership. Because as people are moving back in with their parents, right, their parents don't want to be taking out their dogs. Their cats can live in their rooms type of thing. And so I was like, of anything, this is why I love what we do. That is not at all what I would have expected, right? And so it's really interesting kind of some of these trends, and maybe, right, some of them are like sitting below the surface, but you're starting to see kind of like a really interesting change in how people are thinking about living within their environment. And and who knows, maybe that's driving some of this kind of like housewares as well. So I think there's a very interesting with kind of, multifamily, multi-generational living, what that's doing, as well as, right, kind of the growth in, single households.
And our friend Brandon Isner just had a thought that it could actually drive people out of the house to more visits, and I think there's probably some truth to that. So as well, we talked a little bit about GLP-1 here, and we can kind of see it in the visitation data. So what we've done here is done some subcategories within the restaurant category, their overall restaurant category. And so we see things like frozen yogurt, we see things like smoothie and juice chains, and fast casual. Admittedly, this is probably because of unit growth, less so than same store visits. But you do obviously have some very health oriented fast casual chains that I also think are helping out. So you see positive growth on a year-over-year basis for those categories. At the same time, you see ice cream shops, which have gone negative, at least until the heat wave hit. Then we did see some real positive ones for ice cream shops there, as well as QSR, which has been, there's a number of things pressuring QSR. I mean, I think pricing, again, we have sensitive pricing, we've got competition with grocery, GLP-1. There's a lot of things hitting the QSR customers, but this is just one of many of the categories that we're seeing GLP-1 impact. And obviously we've talked about a number of other ones here, but this is the one I think most pronounced and more definitively we can see a pretty clear impact from GLP-1.
I want to thank Cynthia for asking this question. So how could Amazon's growing role on third-party logistics reshape retail traffic, both online and in store? any impact on the shift from in-store shopping to e-commerce. But I have to, first of all, I love all these, once again, in Manhattan, they have these like little tiny Amazon. I mean, you can like fit through traffic, and, you know, I get up pretty early and they're like all over the streets at like 4 or 5 a.m. But I mean, that's innovation, right? Like, how do you kind of get, you know, more products through the, you know, kind of, you know, output, and, you know, having this, like, it's, you know, truly like a new form of vehicle. But I want to make sure we touch on this. I thought it was fascinating to see Tractor Supply choose to work with Instacart, because I, first of all, kind of thought that trend was not going in that direction, since you lose access to your relationship with the customer and your data. And, you know, we've been seeing, right, whether it's DoorDash or Uber Eats or even, right, Walmart, you know, kind of logistics as a service, Amazon, we've seen a lot of retailers go in a different direction. And it's, I don't know what to make of this kind of, you know, deciding, because you're losing you're losing in some ways your relationship to the customer. I understand maybe you don't look at yourselves as a logistics company, but in many cases, that's your touch point with the consumer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's surprising too. I mean, I think that's one where, I mean, yes, we've been talking about omnichannel for as far back as we've done these. And I think that's still critical, that relationship with the consumer. I mean, that's, yes, it's harder when you're kind of in a more, you know, rural area. And so, you know, to build route density and scale on that's more difficult. But that is a pretty big sacrifice and pretty big trade-off on that point.
Oh, it's interesting.
So we had to cover it at some point, but World Cup has been really, I mean, it's been eye-opening to everybody at Placer too, in terms of the visitation trends. You know, this is just a quick slide showing year-over-year trends for certain restaurants that were near some of the stadiums. I think that was the immediate impact, but certainly in the host cities themselves, generally speaking, we have seen that overall retail activity. And again, our data is only tracking US consumers. We're not picking up the international part of it, but we are seeing visits increase to, you know, most, generally speaking, most retailers. Restaurants, you know, still positive, but a little bit more mixed. I would say, you know, the ones that really jumped out to me when we were doing a deep dive on the data, not a shock, but bars and pubs seen a big increase, and it's not just in Boston with the Scottish fans, it really is universal there. So a big increase to bars and pubs and other attractions in the nearby area. Sporting goods, not a surprise there either. That has been one where we've seen some real positive impact. If you look at Dick's Sporting Goods in the host markets, year-over-year visitation trends the last couple of weeks, very strong, double-digit increases in most cases. So I think that's going to be another story as we get through earnings season this time around. Those are going to be some call-outs that there has been some good strength, you know, in World Cup visitation trends.
And we've spoken just by chance last week to a lot of retailers that we work with in South America, but like throughout.
Yeah.
And they have said, first of all, right, going into the World Cup, they saw a huge uptick in consumer electronic sales, but that traffic has fallen off a cliff, but online has kind of made up a lot of that gap. But they were shocked at just kind of like how much the impact actually has been. They said it far outpaced what they had expected. And right, these retailers have all been through a World Cup before. So I think that's been interesting. But they said overall, I think sales have been a little bit weaker than they would have thought overall. But also the categories and how people are shopping had surprised them.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue if we go 2 slides up here. Yeah, you're good. You're good at, you know, kind of putting it forward here. So this is kind of the year-over-year trends for the first half of 26. What categories are doing well? Which categories are a bit weaker? Not a shock with off-price retail. I mean, that's one where we've seen, you know, doing a great job in terms of merchandising. I think we have the, you know, consumer who's, you know, still conscious about showing off that they you know, have certain brands, but doing it in a way that's, you know, maybe a little bit more affordable. So not a surprise there. But you do see things like sporting goods, which may not look great with 0.1, but a lot of that strength was the last couple, you know, the June timeframe that really we saw some strength there. Consumer electronics too, that's a category that had generally been negative, but we did see about, you know, kind of a month out, 2 months out from the World Cup, there's some real strength there as well. So I do, and then on top of that too, you see beauty and self-care and luxury. Luxury is kind of a sign of bifurcation bifurcation as well, that high-end consumers still doing pretty well, and they continue to shop and kind of feeling good about themselves at this point. Beauty and self-care, we talked about that too, kind of the small ticket everyday luxury is kind of what's driving that. But then you get things like department stores and furniture and home furnishing, which we had already talked about briefly. Big ticket furniture. So that's kind of what we see. But I thought that was a nice segue to kind of talk about some of the categories we're seeing, because you're right, we are seeing some World Cup related categories do maybe better than what people thought coming into the year, but also signs of bifurcation and some of the other things that we talked about from a macro standpoint.
Well, I have to admit, I've been on conference calls in the last 2 days. One was yesterday during the Argentina-England game. And I mean, people were like openly watching the game. And at one point I was surprised. I was like, oh, I mean, when I'm on a call, I'm on a call. And so it was very interesting. And then like the day before, it was one of our clients, it was like 20 people on the call, and literally the person leading the call was like, everyone, right, like, please turn off the game. And I'm just like, this is right, things that you would never have expected. And so I think it'll be interesting once I look forward to our next call, because it'll be interesting to analyze kind of what the impact has been. And if there is, hey, in New York, we had the Knicks and we've had this, and we've had a lot, and so it's just been like all sports all the time. I mean,
and you did a good call out there too, because if you look at kind of the host cities, which markets have seen the strongest growth in sporting goods visits, New York is certainly right up there, and the Knicks helped out quite a bit on that one too. The question that just came in about, is this just in-store visits? This is just in-store visits. This is not online visits. Again, this is just our foot traffic data, so it does not capture the online fulfillment center visits to these locations. This would just represent the retail stores here. Did want to talk a little bit, kind of circle back to warehouse clubs, because this is really the category. In my mind, if we're already kind of looking for clubhouse leaders for retailers of the year, I think you could do a lot worse than picking one of the warehouse clubs, because they really are having a moment. And we were already seeing strength, and I think I already talked about the idea that they're pulling in younger consumers, the younger families that are really driving a lot of the visit growth. But then you throw in gas prices and what that's done. We saw visits to gas stations down. We saw that earlier chart, down kind of mid-single digit. Well, if you look at visits to club gas stations, that's up double digits, even pushing 20% in a lot of cases year over year for basically the last 3 months. And they do capture a lot of that. I mean, not everybody who's going in to fill up their gas at Costco Gas or BJ's or Sam's Club is going into the actual club, but they do capture a lot of that cross visitation there. So
it's interesting. We had a specific inbound from a client yesterday on BJ's Wholesale Club, and they've always been like the sleeper. And you look at their growth right now, not only just kind of top line revenue, but number of stores. Yeah. And that and someone, I don't know if they just like woke up one day and was like, what the, maybe their portfolio manager asked them like, what's happening with BJ's? But it is interesting. It's like, it's the whole sector now. It's not.
Yeah, it really is.
And I think that each one of them has a unique enough customer profile, but also too, we've seen it's like 2/3 of customers have more than one card. And so it's just the way that this consumer likes to shop as well. And I think that, as you mentioned, they're getting a greater portion of the younger consumer, and whether it's value oriented or going back to they all have very strong private label. I think a lot of the trends are in their favor.
Yeah, I think so too. And if we go to the next slide, we can show the visitation trends for the overall gas station category. So what I'm doing on this, put some different classifications for C-stores and gas stations, and this is the year-over-year trend going back to 25. So we've got a group of C-store, what we call food leaders. So that's going to be your Wawa, Sheetz, Quick Trip, Casey's, the ones that have really done a good job investing in the food platform, generally speaking, and outperform. We've got travel centers like Pilots and Love, gas stations, which are everything else except for warehouse club gas stations. And you see this giant jump in March and April to warehouse club gas stations. And this is just the gas stations on the pad site and the parking lot at these locations. Just some really, really strong growth. And that continued through May as well. And just showcases, again, kind of this mentality that consumers are in and the perception that they're getting cheaper gas at the warehouse club. It can really be a driving factor here.
And it goes back to, you're still staying off mall, when you're, for the most part, visiting these. But we've heard Friday I ended up having a much longer call than expected with a senior exec from one of the large REITs. And I think they were pinching themselves at how strong their traffic has been. So it goes back to whether you're, power, strip, regional, super regional, right, enclosed, lifestyle, open air. It's kind of all working, right? Right. There's not a preferred format.
No.
And that I think has also been, I feel like that topic started at ICSC this year, and in a way that I haven't seen it discussed. And it's just kind of continuing to grow in importance, which is, because I think the retailers are also thinking themselves, right, about, since just say we're in one of the tightest retail real estate environments we've ever seen, right?
Yep.
Does it matter where I locate, or is the consumer just coming, right? And so what do you think is happening there, RJ? Because like I said, I don't know if I've ever heard that conversation, and from the REIT side, and then to see it on the retail side as well has been really interesting.
We've been doing a lot of work on this because we have seen a pretty definitive shift in tenant mix at a lot of these different property types. And I think the common thread, I think it's common sense too. We probably kind of see it, but maybe don't appreciate how much happened. Is there's been a definitive shift to the more visit frequency type tenants. So uptick in fitness at a lot of these different property types, an uptick in restaurant, an uptick in med spa, and uptick in just kind of events and activities. The ones that drive you in multiple times a week as opposed to kind of multiple times a month, we've seen a shift towards those retailers, and that's where the tenant mixes shift. And so I think as we've seen that happen, you can kind of customize the tenant mix for whatever your particular location is. I think that's had a big factor why we're seeing such strength at malls, and hopefully we'll get into it. It's always one of those things that we're already running to that point where we could be talking about these things for hours here. Let's move past this one, Stephen. We already talked about kind of the food leaders here as well. We can do that. Let's move up to, I do want to cover drugstore just at 1.2, but we've got the mall index, I think, on 2 slides here that we can cover as well. 2 more, sorry. And so just kind of looking at the different mall property types here too, just kind of close the loop on this discussion. I mean, open air continues to be the dominant format. And again, I think we've talked about this in the past, but the idea of kind of mixed use and kind of becoming more of a community hub and a third place for consumers to be at, I think is really important too. I mean, just because they're going in making visits here, it's not necessarily they're shopping. They're a lot of times using this as just a community hangout. I mean, I'm taking my 14-year-old daughter over to the mall pretty much every day at this point too for mall hangouts. So it is definitely the way people are interacting with malls, partially because of tenant mix, partially because of changes at the properties themselves. I think it really is kind of led to a renaissance of sorts for at least for open air, and I think indoors copying a lot of things that we've seen from open air. So that's what's driving success there. Outlet we could cover a little bit more. That's been a weaker property type, but this has been interesting to look at, and long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully that covered some of the things you're looking for.
Okay, the chat has blown up all of a sudden. So let me make sure I address these. What about traditional? Thank you, Kathy. What about traditional grocery stores with gas, like Kroger and others? Have you looked at that traffic brand, kind of trend too? And can you comment?
Yeah, and thanks for the question on that one, Kathy. What we've seen is that they've outperformed traditional gas stations, but not to the same extent that we've seen for, Club. I think Club is this perceived as having the best prices around. Obviously, their sourcing is a little bit different than some of the other traditional gas stations. So it's been a positive, but I don't think it's been quite the same impact that we've seen for Club at this point.
Okay, thanks. From Michael, why would outlet be weak when people are looking for deals?
Outlet, I mean, and this goes back, we talked about off price. This is something that I think where you're right, outlet should be something that, would be a destination. But I think the fact that we're starting to see a lot of people use off price retail, is really one of the key things here is that off price has been so strong. I think that it has been siphoning off traffic from outlet. Now, obviously, we started to see some stratification of outlet, seeing the luxury focused outlets, which have generally outperformed kind of more traditional outlets. But I do think the combination of off prices dominance as of late, as well as a lot of retailers starting to figure out that they don't need an outlet center. They can have an outlet store and kind of a traditional real estate property. I think those factors have kind of put some downward pressure on outlet. So I think there are some other mitigating factors that would kind of, keep people, from deal seeking at outlet. But at the same time too, we do see positive traffic year over year, just not, the same amount that we've seen in other property types.
I feel like we discussed last time also with some of the tightness in the real estate market, how we've seen, right, not your traditional brand at outlet. And so that has kind of changed, right, this idea of, right, it doesn't say retailer outlet, right? It's just the retailer brand, because that's where they're opening new locations. So I do feel that not only are we seeing outlet move into, less traditional spaces, we're also seeing kind of the full price move into outlet. And so I think that, and also with higher gas prices, right? I mean, I think there's I would say that of any, I'm probably more concerned is maybe too hard of a word, leery might be, right? Like it's definitely on like my radar in terms of watching it much more closely than I have, because I think that some of the changes we're seeing in consumer behavior and how a lot of these retailers are leaning into this, I do feel structurally we're going to see the greatest change in outlet.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, given the traffic issues, I think that you're already, to your point, you're already starting to see changes in terms of the tenant mix at outlet. Even they are starting to move more towards food and beverage and more frequent visit. We're seeing a lot more of kind of, where you can get non-traditional food and beverage products. That's been one of the mix shifts that we've seen, at least with our data, in terms of who they're bringing in there. But I think you are going to see some really interesting changes, and probably reflective of. I mean, we've already seen, at least for luxury outlets, kind of being more of attractions and other things to bring in people. And I suspect kind of traditional outlet malls would start to do the same as well. But I think this, just taps into a broader theme of just, it's not just like, as a retail brand, I can only go to these type of centers. I think there's been an unlock in kind of the mindset among a lot of the retail brands that, it's okay to look at maybe a non-traditional area or a non-traditional one center. I mean, we've got a couple slides on this that we could cover quickly here in terms of, luxury moving into non-traditional. And, we've got I live in the northern suburbs of Chicago. We've got a grocery anchored center, Plaza del Lago, that, just was basically, grocery store, convenience store, a couple small shops and boutiques, but kind of shifted its priority and added, a ton of luxury tenants, invested in kind of look and feel. Seen a pretty good visit, coming from a farther distance, seen a high uptick in more affluent customers. We're seeing people spend more time there. And so I think, and there's not just, there's many of these. We've found a lot of examples of this throughout the United States here as well. There's some really interesting things happening in terms of where people are moving in stores and repurposing old, maybe a grocery anchored center into making it something different here. I think there's a lot more flexibility, a lot more openness to trying new types of properties here too as well. One of the things that we're definitely seeing in 2026.
I mean, if anyone's been in Nashville and seen the Hermes, I mean, that's definitely not where you would have typically thought, right? Like, it goes back to, right, RJ, we all have those like kind of aha moments. And when you start to see that, right, you start to rethink how, like, in a very tight, very high occupancy rate environment, how are retailers and brands rethinking? And someone asked a good question about Simon Properties specifically, right? The shares are up 40% this year, but more, right? I mean, I know they have the highest occupancy rates, I think, that on record, but is there something different about that type of kind of real estate, if you will, versus what we're seeing in some of the other mall owners? Maybe kind of a juxtaposition. We don't need to say, we don't need to comment on the stock performance, but more about, kind of scarcity.
I mean, I think scarcity is a big part of it. I think Simon is really one of the banner examples out there. Instead of just being a landlord, they really are a facilitator for a lot of the brands. I mean, doing things like e-commerce fulfillment at some of their centers, doing things like loyalty programs and other things like that. I mean, what some of the moves they've made, I think are really interesting. It kind of reflects, kind of being more of a, a true partner with a lot of retail brands right now. And I think that's been one of the secrets to really, making them so successful. And I think we're seeing that, they're not the only ones by any means too. We're seeing a lot of really interesting things. If we look at other owner operators out there as well, a lot of groups doing some really things and really kind of deepen that relationship with their tenants.
All right, I think we have to, we're down to like our last 4 minutes. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we can look past it. Let's just cover just the median household income and dwell time of those properties that we've looked at. But I think, we got to get predictions here. We always got to do that. So you want to go first or you want me to go first for kind of the back half of the year in 27? I mean, I think we should at least spend a couple minutes here.
I mean, we're starting to see, it's interesting, a real interest and focus on robotics and how that changes, right, the physical store experience. So do we have higher in-stock rates? Do consumers feel more safe in a center at night, right? And this, this idea of how is the experience changing through AI, physical AI and others. But that's been going back to the topics you wouldn't think you'd necessarily be talking about as it relates to retail real estate. We're seeing a lot more focus on that area of tech in terms of, I mean, I think we're going to see, like we did last year, fourth quarter, stronger apparel, footwear, accessories performance than anyone expects. I mean, part of the challenges are with supply chains right now. And so I also think that we're not going to see a glut either, right? And we're going to see, I think we're going to see potentially going back to these higher margins. And I think a lot of it's going to be, I think scarcity is going to be a bigger issue this holiday season. I think we're going to see people buy things earlier because they're worried it's not going to be in stock when they actually want it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a trend that we definitely saw last year too. I mean, the October visits were the early October visits as people kind of locked in those holiday purchases. I completely agree that there's this worry that I'm not going to be able to get what I want for the holiday period. So I think that's going to continue again into this year as well. So I 100% agree. Robotics is an interesting one because it's been so hard for particularly I've been watching the restaurant space for a couple of decades now, and it's hard to scale. The joke is, for every automatic robot that you put in the restaurant, you still need 2 additional workers to fix it when it breaks down. I think that's overly simplifying. I do think some of the assembly line things that we're seeing from Wingstop and Sweetgreen and Chipotle and others are interesting and could be something down the road. But there's still some room. I think I get the reasons for why there's interest in it too. But like everything technology, like particularly with robotics and physical stuff, could take a little bit longer to adopt. What I think has been interesting, we talked a lot about blurring of the lines, kind of competition across, food away from home, food at home. I think we're going to start to see more and more M&A activity, kind of pairing up, instead of just a direct competitor of yours, maybe I'm a club channel that wants to get in the C-store space. Maybe I'm something in grocery that wants to move into into another channel as well. I think we're going to start to see a little bit more M&A activity across different channels as they kind of fulfill need states across different things here too. So that's one of the things I'm keeping an eye on, because we've already seen gas stations pair up with restaurants a little bit with the Potbelly acquisition last year, but I think there could be more situations like that across different food retail types.
I think that to kind of take that thread, we're also seeing retailers and brands kind of extend their portfolio mix with success. And I would say way more success than we have in the past. So I think that, going back to what retailers are being given the permission to sell by the consumer, and then also what permission they're giving themselves, I think that, and it's beauty, health, and wellness is really kind of that extension that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And then I think how it's sold and how they partner. I mean, I agree with you. I think we're going to see acquisition activity, partnership activity at a pace we have, maybe never seen.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. I think that is one of those things that be on the lookout there. We're going to see a lot of new trends on that front, and a lot of surprises as we get in the back half of this year and into the next year.
Well, RJ, it is never, like I said in my LinkedIn post, this is the fastest hour all quarter.
It
And I
really
mean,
is, yeah.
We should, one of these days, we should see just how long, right? Like just give ourselves a day, because I don't think we would ever run out of topics to discuss, because it's just so interesting right now.
Oh God, we could go on for hours here, and the amount of retailers and CPG companies and restaurants we could cover. It'd be fun. Maybe a marathon session on one of these days here. But always a pleasure. I always think this group asks the best questions too. So thanks, audience. You guys are great at asking the best questions. You know, right up there with the CMA crowd. They do a good job too. But you know, this group is always my favorite, because the right questions to be asking at the right time, and it's you know, it's always fun.
And we had a few of you ask, we will make the slides available, and any questions that we couldn't get to, we will get you answers. Thank you. And RJ, as always, thanks. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks.